You're listening to Catholic Chicago. Ahead, the Archdiocese of Chicago brings you programs about the people, events, and issues that touch our lives. Welcome to Catholic Chicago.
Welcome to Beyond the Headlines. My name's Joyce DeRiga, and I'm the editor of the Chicago Catholic, and this is where we take a look and talk to the newsmakers making the headlines that we're covering in the Chicago Catholic. And today we have a special guest. We have Bishop Joseph Perry. He's an auxiliary bishop for here in Chicago, and he's also a postulator of the cause for canonization for Father Augustus Tolton, and he's on the a bunch of committees, but he's on the USCCB's, he's the chairman of the USCCB's ad hoc committee against racism. So today I wanted to talk about with him about the work of that committee and the work the church has done to end racism over the years. But welcome, Bishop Perry.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
So I wanted to start off with, as you know, on July 25th, President Biden made it official that there will be a monument to Emmett Till and his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, in Chicago, and then there'll also be one in Mississippi. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that, what you think that will do to the whole discussion to end racism in America and here in Chicago in particular.
Well, the news came as something of a surprise. It's hard to figure out how much the president knows about little old Chicago. But nonetheless, the story of Emmett Till has lasted over the many years, especially here in Chicago, because he grew up here, and his ancestral home is still here in Chicago, and it's being made into something of a museum place for people to visit as a marker of the civil rights movement in this town and then elsewhere. Unbeknownst to the Mobley family at that time, and certainly Emmett himself, it became something of a marker in that history, being just a lad of 14 years and so viciously murdered down in Mississippi. He was of an age where probably didn't know much about what was going on with the whole race question in this country, being so young. But fortunately, he turned out to be something of a martyr in the thing. A group of us African-American Catholics were in Washington, as you know, for the every 5-year Congress of the African-American Catholics, and we took some time out. About 1,000 of us took some time out to go to the African American Museum there in Washington, D.C., and we ran across a couple of people who were emotionally overwhelmed at seeing the coffin, the original coffin of Emmett Till that's there in the museum, and the large photographs of the whole tragedy, and his mother's outpouring of grief and emotion. And I was watching certain of the young people who were looking at all that. That's the present generation. It's been asked to somehow deal with all of that and put it into some sort of a context. Statement that the Archdiocese put out in response to Biden's gesture in this regard mentioned that we hope that this tragedy, as well as its memory, somehow would inspire the present generation to take up the work of fighting bigotry in all of its manifestations, and hopefully in ways in which present generations have been able to accomplish this far. So the president's gesture certainly opens up memory, some painful memories of that time, 1955. I was just a second grader at the time.
Wow.
Buzz household and the African American community was rather large. time. Certainly not atypical of a lot of things that were going on in the 50s and 40s and 30s and 20s, but somehow hit people of goodwill rather hard because Emmett was just so young. So as markers go and monuments go, we hope that it can trigger some passion to continue what we've done so far as a nation, as a people, to heal racism and any sort of bias that pushes people away, marginalizes them, and so forth.
I hope it does. It does achieve that. And I don't think we all really know. We need to get better on our history and what we know, because I didn't know about Emmett Till until I moved to Chicago, and so it's something that we just have to get better at, right? So that we have a better understanding of things. So
it's amazing what
the
population remembers. And remember Rosa Parks.
Right.
She's considered the great trigger of the civil rights movement. Maybe Emmett Till was really the first. We don't know, because historians can only assess that. He certainly was much more than just a Chicago boy. He fell on rough times. Huge, huge, huge tragedy.
And it still resonates today. Okay, so speaking of which, so you're on the United States Conference for Catholic Bishops. You're the chairman of the Ad Hoc Committee Against Racism. So is that a newer committee, or when was that established?
It was established by the bishops upon the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King.
Ah, okay.
Goes back to, what would there be, 2008. First chairman of it was Bishop George Murray, who was executive bishop of Chicago.
Yeah.
Sorry, he was the first, and then, of course, he's deceased. Archbishop Fabre, who's now the Archbishop of Louisville, was the second chair. Now, chairmanship is surprisingly fell to me.
So what does it all entail? Like, what's the purpose of well, that's in the name, but why was it established, and what work does it do?
It was in a response to the bishop's reflections upon Martin Luther King's legacy, the whole civil rights movement, and the role of the church, that whole movement. It's designed to be a voice. Bishops where the voice is asked for or is appropriate, either by the bishop's initiative or the initiative of the requests of others who ask all the time, whether the bishop's saying or whether the bishop's thinking about this or this, that social problem. The bishops have made, over the course of the years, about 10 statements on racism since 1958.
Okay.
They to Open Wide Our Hearts, which was issued in 2008. It was a little bit different than any other statement they made before. Of course, each of them has their own uniqueness about them. But Open Wide Our Hearts is written in the form of a letter like St. Paul would write to the churches, the New Testament, encouraging them, exhortation, that sort of thing. When you look at the whole civil rights movement and the legislation that came from that, civil rights have offered definite progress in race relations in this country, but the scope of the problem has too often, I think, been framed in terms of the law and the courts. And there's another side, of course, it comes from our side, which is the notion of personal conversion, societal renewal, which occasioned Bishop's most recent pastoral letter. Somehow we have to continue the work to dispel this visual and emotional dissonance that certain people suffer when people of color or different background encroach upon our space. This particular ad hoc committee is linked with other departments of the Conference of Bishops, because essentially the ad hoc committee is the voice of the bishops. It's not a political committee or anything of that sort. But it is a voice of the bishops where that voice is needed and it's appropriate. We're also linked with other religious groups, ecumenically with other kinds of groups, such as restorative, justice and peace groups. And we have occasion to offer advice and coaching to personnel around the various dioceses, colleges and universities, seminaries, religious formation. They're asked to present about pastoral aspects of eradicating racism, and significant issues come up for those areas. That's essentially what the ad hoc committee is about.
Okay. We're going to have to take a break here in like 3 minutes, so I'm going to use this time to plug the paper, and then when we come back, let's talk about, I printed out these things like practical steps for eradicating racism, any, advice that the committee has. But again, we're talking to Bishop Joseph Perry, who's the chairman of the ad hoc committee for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And this is Beyond the Headlines, and I want you to check out the Chicago Catholic at chicagocatholic.com. You can subscribe for $30 a year. We publish about every 2 weeks. You can also sign up for our free e-newsletter on our website and follow us on social media. Cardinal Cupich regularly writes, so you can see what or read about what he's thinking. We cover things at the Vatican, and we cover a lot of good news going on around the Archdiocese. Right now, for our next issue, I'm working on stories about what the parishes are doing to help the asylum seekers that have come to Chicago. More and more coming every day. So go to chicagocatholic.com, and this is Beyond the Headlines, and we'll be right back. Thanks.
Caring adults make all the difference in the lives of adolescents. Catholic Charities understands this, and our mentorship programs provide a free opportunity for young adults to spend time with volunteers who genuinely care about them. This program is ideal for youth aged 9 through 12 who may need support navigating the challenges of childhood and early adolescence. Our amazing volunteers serve as friends who help youth recognize their strengths and empower them to reach their full potential. Catholic Charities conducts a thorough background check on every volunteer, and our program coordinator closely monitors and supports every relationship. Mentoring is a fun after-school program that can help young adults build confidence and enjoy fun activities with their peers, too. To learn more, visit CatholicCharities.net or call 312-655-7970 in Cook County and 847-782-4224 in Lake County. We're connecting youth with great role models. Join us today.
People always say, how can you spend your day with 3-year-olds? Seeing the changes that they go through and just the journey and how they grow, this is a very rewarding job. Even though at the end of the day, we're not the highest paid people on earth. And when I have a parent contact me and say, my child loves school, that to me, I'm setting that foundation for their love of learning. Because really, you are changing lives, you are molding lives.
Shape the next generation of leaders. Teach. Apply today at archchicago.org/schooljobs.
Did you know that Catholic Charities accepts car donations? If you're ready to free up space in your garage and put a stop to all those expenses that go along with owning a car, we will gratefully accept your donation, whether the car is running or not. You choose a pickup time that is convenient for you, and we will make the donation as easy as possible free of charge. You'll receive a charitable donation receipt as well. We accept all types of vehicles nationwide, and you will know that your donation is made to Catholic Charities, an agency you can trust. To learn more about donating your car, call 877-786-4483. That's 877-786-4483. Thank you.
Welcome back to Beyond the Headlines. My name is Joyce DeRiga. I'm editor of the Chicago Catholic, and today we're talking to Bishop Joseph Perry, who's an auxiliary bishop here in Chicago, and we're talking about the work of, he's chairman of the ad hoc committee against racism for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and we're talking about the work of that committee and also what Catholics can do to combat or address the issue of racism. So on that note, Bishop, can we talk about, like, what are some steps or what advice would you give to parishes or just the average person in the pew on what they can do to work against racism?
One way to work against racism is to somehow deal with some of the myths come out of racism, or perceptions, assumptions, attitudes issue forth as a result of racism. When we talk about racism, it's often perceived to be an ugly one, but it denotes some of the worst things that can issue forth from a human being towards another. That is rejection, despising, hatred, those kinds of things. One way to overcome that portion of the human condition is to work towards greater familiarity. Our present generation, the generation before it probably as well, came out of a social posture whereby we endorsed or got used to separateness, separate space. Certain people lived on this part of the city, others lived on that side. People were defined by language, ethnicity, those kinds of things that kept people apart. We weren't so ready to explore or be interested in or be curious about the gifts of difference. And that continued certain prejudgments, myths, stereotypes laid against people. But the more we become familiar and somehow take the courage to learn from one another and to appreciate the gifts of difference, I think it helps to overcome stereotypes that feed into racism or bias or bigotry, all those ugly things that are part of, unfortunately, human condition. The church can be a leader. I think every bishop and every pastor is preoccupied by trying to come up with ways creatively to bring people together. Our parishes today are more than likely to be profiled as pictures of diversity, communities of diversity that did not exist once upon a time before. And parishes that were ethnically and linguistically defined. I hear several tongues, dialects, languages, and all in the same parish.
Right.
And that is something I think to be encouraged, to even be emphasized, sense of creating the kingdom of God, which is a kingdom of variety, marvelous variety.
I wonder if locally Renew My Church hasn't helped that along too, because we've, you're well aware, we've noticed that parishes that, yes, may have been separated more by ethnic lines, like the Filipino parish or the Polish parish or the Mexican parish, those have merged together. So now there's new communities coming together. And I know some of the times that can cause friction, and people, we often don't like change, but I think maybe that'll be a benefit of Renew My Church, right? And that's where you spoke about that to me in the story about that there should be it shouldn't be the black parish or the Polish parish or the Mexican parish. It should be the parish.
Parish, exactly. They're kind of accidents of social, how should I put it? Accidents of our social grouping, our social reality. Different parishes based on language and background and culture. We speak of the kingdom of God, which is a place of great linguistic variety, and should be. So whenever we worship on Sunday, for example, we find that we are a mono-racial parish. Not that in itself is bad, but we should feel a kind of incompleteness. We're not a picture of the church in its totality as it could be or can be. Thank God we are together as we are, but church is Pentecost Sunday. People with different shaped noses, different colored eyes, different hues of skin. Surprisingly, we're in Jerusalem one particular day. The Spirit inspired some marvelous things amidst. We can appreciate that model or that template of the human community. So it's a lot of hard work.
Amen. We're pre-taping this, and this right now, World Youth Day is starting in Lisbon, Portugal. And for me, that was an amazing. I went when it was in Toronto, and it was an amazing experience of what you're talking about with Pentecost, because you've got people from all over the world, and celebrating Mass together. It was just, I get choked up. It was beautiful.
Oh, yeah. I remember the 2009 World Youth Day, which was in Cologne, Germany. It was quite an inspiring experience. We had families who took us in. I was a chaplain for about 12 young adults.
Okay.
Divided up into a number of German families. Powerful experience. We lived in Dusseldorf. Everything else was taking place in Cologne, Germany. So we were on these trains every day. Ran into all kinds of kids making noise and so forth. We went out in the field with Pope Benedict XVI.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
We have about, I think, like 4 minutes left, and I see your photo of Father Tolton behind you over your head. Can you can we end with that? You're the postulator of the cause for Father Tolton, and I know I've asked this before, but what would he think? What would his response be to the way the world is today? We've come far from when he was first ordained, but we haven't come far enough, right?
We have work to do. Father Tolton brought a very decided human and pastoral touch to his life. He was a very large memory of our local church and our church Diocese of Springfield, and a number of other places that he stepped in his short life here. And I think if he was around today, he'd probably be surprised progress that has been made, and then some parts of it still seem to be truncated.
Well, that's hopeful. At least there's something, and he can definitely be a model for us. I know that, I know that you know this, but to our listeners and our viewers, he was. You call him someone who is ahead of his time. That he welcomed blacks and whites into worship together and on the altar and the altar servers and all that stuff. So he was an enterprising man. He saw what the church could be at a time that the church wasn't. And I always find that inspirational, and I think everybody can learn from that. So I want to pitch. So if you want, there are resources on the website for the Ad Hoc Committee Against Racism. If you go to the usccb.org and you do a search on there, there's some great resources, some tips on things to do. There's the pastoral letter, Open Wide Our Hearts. There's a link to a children's book that came out from Loyola Press, which is here in Chicago, that helps speak to this issue. So I'd recommend everybody go there. And also go to the archchicago.org site and check out all of our stuff that we have on Father Tolton. There's a little stamp on the page where you can get a link to all the resources that and the history and everything that has to do with Father Tolton. And of course, please go to Chicago Catholic. If you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing. It supports our ministry here at the Archdiocese. You can also sign up for, as I said before, a free newsletter or follow us on social media, and you can keep in touch with what the Cardinal's up to and what's the good news, as we like to say, we're covering the good news of what's going on in the pews and how God's leading people through ministry to the church. So again, Bishop Perry, thank you so much for coming, and thanks for all the work you do. I know you're on a bunch of committees, and the work with the cause, and just being a vicar for the Archdiocese is huge. So thank you for making the time.
Thank you. Take care.
You
Thanks
too.
for having me.
You're welcome. And until next time, everybody have a gentle and joy-filled day. Bye-bye.